Just as modernism transformed fiction, so it had a tremendous influence on the form of the essay. As a non-fiction form, the essay was more dependent on reason and logic than other literary forms. So modernism's challenge to rationality and to a truth independent of individual perspectives was also a challenge to the essay. Virginia Woolf's essay, A Room of One's Own, illustrates how the modernist essay responded to this challenge. It was based on a series of lectures that Woolf gave at the Cambridge Women's Colleges, Newnham College and Girton College, in 1928, and it was published as a book in 1929. She had been asked to speak on the topic of women and fiction, and here's part of the introductory portion of her essay. The title, Women in Fiction, might mean, and you may have meant it to mean, women and what they are like, or it might mean women and the fiction that they write, or it might mean women and the fiction that is written about them, or it might mean that somehow all three are inextricably mixed together and you want me to consider them in that light. But when I began to consider the subject in this last way, which seemed the most interesting, I soon saw that it had one fatal drawback. I should never be able to come to a conclusion. I should never be able to fulfill what is, I understand, the first duty of the lecturer, to hand you after an hour's discourse a nugget of pure truth, to wrap up between the pages of your notebooks and keep on the mantelpiece forever. All I could do was to offer you an opinion upon one minor point. A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. And that, as you will see, leaves the great problem of the true nature of woman and the true nature of fiction unsolved. I have shirked the duty of coming to a conclusion upon these two questions. Women in fiction remain, so far as I am concerned, unsolved problems. She does give us a kind of conclusion, but not, as she says, a nugget of pure truth, which for a modernist just isn't possible. The conclusion she does come to is unexpected because it focuses just on the material conditions a woman needs to write well, rather than something more elevated or literary. She needs an independent income and a room of her own to write well, and she has to leave the major questions, the true nature of woman and the true nature of fiction, unanswered, perhaps because there's no one truth to be had here. But she goes on. But in order to make some amends, I'm going to do what I can to show you how I arrived at this opinion about the room and the money. I'm going to develop in your presence, as fully and freely as I can, the train of thought which led me to think this. Perhaps if I lay bare the ideas, the prejudices that lie behind this statement, you will find that they have some bearing upon women and some upon fiction. At any rate, when a subject is highly controversial, and any question about sex is that, one cannot hope to tell the truth. One can only show how one came to hold whatever opinion one does hold. One can only give one's audience the chance of drawing their own conclusions as they observe the limitations, the prejudices, the idiosyncrasies of the speaker. Fiction here is likely to contain more truth than fact. Therefore, I propose, making use of all the liberties and licenses of a novelist, to tell you the story of the 2 days that preceded my coming here, how, bowed down by the weight of the subject which you have laid upon my shoulders, I pondered it and made it work in and out of my daily life. I need not say that what I am about to describe has no existence. Oxbridge is an invention. So is Fernham. I is only a convenient term for somebody who has no real being. Lies will flow from my lips, but there may perhaps be some truth mixed up with them. It is for you to seek out this truth and to decide whether any part of it is worth keeping. Notice how perspectivalism has transformed the essay. She's not going to argue logically, bring independent evidence to support her conclusions. Instead, she's going to help us see the issue from her perspective. Show us what in her experience and in her thinking led her to her conclusions. And by following along with her in this way, we may come to see the issue from her perspective. Notice also that she's going to use fictional techniques in her essay. Fiction here is likely to contain more truth than fact. As students of literature, we're used to the idea that fiction can contain truth, sometimes deeper truth than nonfiction, but that idea is seldom applied to the essay. Notice that even the I, the self, is a kind of fiction here. There's no unified self corresponding to the speaker in the essay. Like much modernist literature, Woolf's essay is going to force the reader to do more work and to make the final judgment. It is for you to seek out this truth. You will see more clearly how Woolf uses modernist techniques in fiction to make her points as you read the essay, but I want to point out a couple of things before you begin. Just as in Mrs. Dalloway in Bond Street, Mrs. Dalloway's thoughts were constantly being affected by her immediate surroundings. So Woolf's self in the essay comes to some of her conclusions not through logic, but because of seemingly random experiences. One excellent example is the Manx Cat. If, by good luck, there had been an ashtray handy, if one had not knocked the ash out of the window in default, if things had been a little different from what they were, one would not have seen, presumably, a cat without a tail. The sight of that abrupt and truncated animal padding softly across the quadrangle changed by some fluke of the subconscious intelligence the emotional light for me. It was as if someone had let fall a shade. Perhaps the excellent hawk was relinquishing its hold. Certainly, as I watched the Manx Cat pause in the middle of the lawn, as if it too questioned the universe, something seemed lacking. Something seemed different. But what was lacking? What was different, I asked myself, listening to the talk. The sudden appearance of the cat without a tail leads her to think about what's missing, what has changed since World War I, what is different in society now. Perhaps her boldest use of fictional technique is in her invention of a sister for Shakespeare, Judith Shakespeare. It's a kind of thought experiment in which she imagines what would happen to a woman with a genius for writing if she had been born in the time of Shakespeare. Let me imagine, since facts are so hard to come by, what would have happened had Shakespeare had a wonderfully gifted sister called Judith, let us say. Woolf's story of her life is fiction, but through fiction, Woolf is able to make us see the impossible conditions, psychological and material, that a woman of genius at that time would face. The fictional character helps answer the question, why was there never a female Shakespeare? Do women lack the necessary genius? It also bolsters Woolf's argument that a woman writer today has to have the right material conditions, an independent income, and a room of her own.